The only reason a mafia boss survives long enough to become a legend is because he never looks away. The only reason mine almost died was because he looked at me. The sound of my hand striking Adrian Romano's face echoed across the ballroom like a champagne glass shattering. Then silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Hundreds of guests froze exactly where they stood. Crystal glasses hovered halfway to trembling lips. Conversations died in unfinished whispers. Even the string quartet stopped playing as if the air itself had forgotten how to breathe. I stared into my husband's steel blue eyes, waiting for the explosion everyone expected. Adrian Romano ruled the most powerful mafia family on the East Coast. Governors feared him. Billionaires negotiated with him carefully. Rival bosses measured every word before speaking his name. No one touched Adrian Romano. No one challenged him in public. And no one had ever slapped him across the face. Until me. I could almost hear the thoughts racing through every mind inside the grand ballroom. She just signed her own death warrant. But they didn't know what I knew. Adrian's head had turned a few inches from the impact. Just enough. A sharp crack split the silence. Not another slap. Something far more dangerous. One of the towering windows behind us suddenly fractured, a tiny white star appearing in the thick glass before spiderweb cracks spread across its surface. Adrian's expression changed instantly. His eyes didn't stay on me. They moved past my shoulder, calculating distances faster than anyone else could process what had happened. Every muscle in his body became perfectly still. "Seal every exit," he said calmly. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Within seconds, dozens of men in black suits moved with flawless precision. Guests gasped as the massive ballroom doors locked one after another. No panic. No shouting. Just disciplined efficiency. Adrian slowly touched the faint warmth on his cheek before looking back at me. There was no anger in his face. Only questions. "Nobody leaves," he repeated. Somewhere above us, security rushed toward the upper balcony. A minute later, they escorted a man away without saying a word. Most of the guests never even realized what had almost happened. They only knew something had changed. Adrian stepped closer until only inches separated us. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. I forced myself to meet his eyes, even though my heartbeat pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. "Know what?" I whispered. He studied my face the way a chess master studies a board after discovering a move he never expected. For years I had learned to recognize every version of Adrian Romano. The husband, the strategist, the ruler. This was the investigator, the most dangerous version of all. He wasn't looking for excuses. He was looking for truth. Behind him, his chief of security leaned close enough to speak without anyone else hearing. Adrian listened without blinking. Then he gave the smallest nod. The guard disappeared again. Adrian never looked away from me. "Claire," he said softly, almost gently, "either you just saved my life," he paused, letting the unfinished sentence settle between us like ice, "or you've been standing closer to my enemies than I ever imagined." Adrian did not order anyone to arrest me. That terrified me far more than if he had. He escorted me out of the ballroom himself while the guests remained trapped inside, every conversation replaced by nervous speculation. His hand rested lightly against the small of my back, steady but unreadable. It looked like the gesture of a devoted husband. I knew better. Adrian Romano never touched anyone without a reason. We entered a private conference room overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Rain streaked across the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring thousands of city lights into silver rivers. He closed the door himself, something he almost never did. There were no guards inside, no advisors, no lawyers, only the two of us. He loosened the cuff of his tailored jacket and quietly placed a small metallic object onto the polished walnut table. It was a flattened bullet, its surface scarred from striking reinforced glass. I stared at it without blinking. 3 inches, Adrian said calmly. "That is how far my head moved after you slapped me." His voice remained perfectly level. 3 inches changed everything. He watched every breath I took, measuring not my words but my reactions. That was how he won wars. Not with louder threats, with quieter observations. "Who told you?" he asked. "No one." "Who warned you?" "No one." "Then why did you do it?" I swallowed slowly. "Because I needed you to look at me." It sounded ridiculous the moment I said it. Adrian did not smile. He simply continued studying me with those impossible blue eyes that had unsettled presidents, judges, and rival bosses alike. Finally, he slid a tablet across the table. Security footage filled the screen. I watched myself leaving our townhouse 3 different mornings over the past 3 weeks. Different clothes, different weather, same destination. An old brick church in Brooklyn. The footage changed again. There I was entering a quiet coffee shop 2 blocks away. Then another angle showed me sitting across from an elderly man wearing a gray coat and a weathered Yankees cap. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim. Adrian folded his hands. You met him 4 times. My heartbeat stumbled. Who is he? He continued. I remained silent. My surveillance team searched every federal database. He does not officially exist anymore. Adrian leaned back slightly. The last record connected to that face ended 10 years ago. He let the silence work against me. His name was Vincent DeLuca. I felt the blood drain from my face before I could stop it. Adrian noticed. He noticed everything. Interesting, he murmured. You recognize the name. He reached into his jacket and placed another photograph beside the tablet. It showed Vincent standing beside Adrian's late father decades earlier, both younger, both smiling, surrounded by men who had long since disappeared from the underworld. He was my father's closest advisor, Adrian said quietly, until the day he vanished. I looked away toward the rain. He is supposed to be dead. That is what everyone believes. Adrian stood and walked toward the window, hands resting behind his back. Claire, I have spent years hunting traitors. People lie with their mouths every day. Their eyes are usually more honest. He slowly turned to face me again. You are protecting someone. Before I could answer, his phone vibrated once. He glanced at the screen for only a second. The calm expression that rarely changed became even colder. My security chief just confirmed something. He slipped the phone back into his pocket without breaking eye contact. The man who disappeared 10 years ago walked into one of my warehouses exactly 42 minutes before tonight's meeting. He took one measured step closer. Now I need to know whether he came back to save my family or destroy it. I did not sleep that night. Neither did Adrian. Our townhouse overlooking the Hudson River remained unnaturally quiet, but I could feel the entire Romano organization moving beneath the silence like an ocean current too powerful to stop. Every phone call was shorter than usual. Every security update arrived faster than normal. Adrian had shifted into the version of himself that built empires. By sunrise, he had already changed every meeting on his schedule. He canceled a billion-dollar shipping negotiation without explanation. He postponed a gathering with 2 allied families. Instead, he locked himself inside the operations room that only his inner circle could enter. By noon, 3 enormous digital maps covered the walls, filled with warehouse locations, shipping routes, financial records, and hundreds of names connected by thin red lines. Adrian did not chase rumors. He chased patterns. I stood outside the glass wall, watching him move quietly between the screens. His chief strategist, Daniel Mercer, pointed toward a series of warehouse reports. Adrian listened without interrupting. Finally, he circled one location in Brooklyn with a black marker. Everyone else immediately stopped talking. That was the power he carried. He did not need to raise his voice. A single decision redirected an entire organization. An hour later, Daniel entered the sitting room where I had been pretending to read the same page for nearly 20 minutes. His usual confidence had disappeared. Mrs. Romano, he said carefully, Mr. Romano would like you to remain inside the house until further notice. Am I under guard? I asked. He hesitated just long enough to answer the question without speaking. This is for your safety. I almost smiled. Everyone kept using that word. Safety. They all assumed Adrian was protecting me from someone outside the family. None of them realized the greatest danger was already standing inside it. Late that afternoon, Adrian returned wearing the same charcoal suit from the night before. Only his loosened tie suggested he had been awake as long as I had. He poured himself a cup of black coffee and remained standing near the fireplace. Warehouse 12, he said without looking at me. Vincent entered at 6:23 yesterday evening. My fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. He stayed exactly 4 minutes. Adrian placed several printed photographs on the coffee table. Grainy surveillance images showed the elderly man entering through a service entrance. Another camera captured him leaving alone. Nothing was stolen, Adrian continued. Nothing was damaged. Yet 15 minutes after he left, every interior camera inside the building stopped recording for exactly 90 seconds. I slowly looked up. What happened during those 90 seconds? Adrian finally met my eyes. Someone replaced one of my encrypted ledgers with a perfect copy. A chill ran through me. That ledger contained years of confidential financial agreements between the Romano family and nearly every major organization on the East Coast. Whoever controlled it could manipulate alliances without firing a single shot. Adrian walked toward the window overlooking the river. Only 6 people knew where that ledger was stored. He paused before speaking again. 5 of them have worked beside me for more than a decade. I already knew where his thoughts were leading. Trust was becoming his greatest vulnerability. Then another secure phone rang. Daniel answered outside the room before rushing back inside with unusual urgency. "Boss," he said quietly, "one of our senior accountants resigned this morning." Adrian barely reacted. People resign every day. Daniel swallowed hard. He resigned 12 hours after transferring every personal asset he owned overseas. Adrian closed his eyes for one brief second before opening them again. "Bring every department head to headquarters," he ordered. "Someone inside my family has been preparing this for a very long time, and I intend to discover who before they make their next move." I finally understood why Vincent had refused to answer every question I asked during those quiet meetings in Brooklyn. He had never been trying to protect himself. He had been protecting Adrian from the one mistake no mafia boss could survive. That evening, Adrian returned to headquarters before sunset, and the atmosphere inside the Romano Tower felt heavier than it ever had before. Men who had served him faithfully for years avoided unnecessary conversations. Every elevator required a new security code. Every office had been searched. Every financial record was being audited twice. Adrian was not hunting an enemy anymore. He was testing the loyalty of his own empire. When he walked into the command room, every conversation stopped immediately. Daniel handed him a thick folder containing background reports on every department head, every warehouse supervisor, every accountant, and every advisor who had touched the missing ledger. Adrian opened the file without saying a word. He studied every page the way a surgeon studies an X-ray before making the first incision. Nothing escaped his attention. A date, a signature, a bank transfer that looked ordinary until it was compared with another transfer made 18 months earlier. He circled 3 names with a black pen and quietly slid the folder back across the table. "Remove them from every active operation," he said. "Do not arrest them. Do not question them. I want them comfortable enough to make their next mistake." No one challenged the order. They simply nodded and disappeared to carry it out. That was the difference between fear and respect. Adrian had earned both. An hour later, he returned home carrying a small wooden box I had never seen before. He placed it gently on the dining table between us. Inside rested an old silver pocket watch, faded photographs, and a folded handwritten letter sealed with the Romano family crest. My breathing slowed the moment I recognized the handwriting. "Vincent." Adrian watched my expression carefully. "You knew this existed." It was not a question. I closed my eyes for a moment before answering. "I knew he kept something for the day you stopped trusting the wrong people." Adrian remained perfectly still. "Why did he choose you?" I looked down at the unopened letter. "Because he believed you would never believe him if he came back himself." Silence settled between us. Outside, thunder rolled across the river, shaking the windows. Adrian finally handed me the letter. "Read it." My fingers hesitated before breaking the seal. The paper had yellowed with age, but the ink remained clear. The first sentence stole the air from my lungs. "Claire, if you are reading this, Adrian has already begun suspecting the people who are still trying to save him. Do not let him continue. He is following the path they designed for him." I looked up so quickly that the letter almost slipped from my hands. Adrian's face revealed nothing, yet I could see his mind racing. The evidence he had spent 2 days collecting suddenly felt less certain than it had only minutes before. Vincent had predicted every step, every suspicion, every investigation, which meant someone had been guiding Adrian toward false conclusions long before the attempted assassination. Adrian slowly reached for the letter, reading the next lines himself. His jaw tightened for the first time since this nightmare had begun. Vincent had written one final warning beneath the signature. "Trust the man who never asks for power. Fear the one who keeps refusing it." Adrian folded the letter with deliberate care, then looked toward the family portrait hanging above the fireplace, his eyes fixed on a familiar face that neither of us had questioned for years. For the first time since our marriage, I saw uncertainty replace absolute confidence in the man who ruled an empire, because he had just realized the enemy might not be hiding inside his organization at all. The enemy might have been sitting at his family table for decades. The next morning, Adrian summoned every captain, advisor, and financial director to the Romano headquarters, but he deliberately left one chair empty. Nobody asked why. Nobody dared. The empty seat belonged to the only man outside the room whose opinion could still influence the entire family, Adrian's uncle, Victor Romano. For nearly 20 years, Victor had refused every official title while quietly becoming the voice everyone trusted. Until now, Adrian had considered that humility is strength. Vincent's final warning had forced him to consider another possibility. Adrian stood at the head of the conference table, his charcoal suit perfectly pressed, his expression impossible to read. "We have a leak," he said calmly. "From this moment forward, every operation will be divided into separate channels. No one outside this room will receive the complete picture." Nobody argued. The meeting ended in less than 12 minutes. That alone told me Adrian had already started laying a trap. Instead of searching for the traitor, he intended to make the traitor reveal himself. When he returned home that afternoon, he surprised me by placing a thin folder in front of me. "Read it," he said. Inside were shipping schedules, financial summaries, and coded transaction reports. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Adrian met my eyes. "Because I no longer know which advisor I can trust." It was the closest thing to vulnerability I had ever heard from him. "I trust your judgment more than theirs." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I noticed something unusual. 3 different shipping routes all ended at warehouses that had never handled international cargo before. "These locations make no sense," I said quietly. Adrian nodded once. "Exactly." He pointed toward one page. "Those routes were recommended by Victor." My stomach tightened. Before I could respond, Daniel called through Adrian's secure phone. His voice sounded controlled, but I recognized the urgency beneath it. One of the 3 managers Adrian had quietly removed from active duty had unexpectedly withdrawn every dollar from his personal accounts before disappearing without informing anyone. Adrian did not look surprised. "Track every vehicle registered to his family," he answered. "Do not approach him." He ended the call and looked back at me. The first piece just moved. Less than an hour later, another message arrived. This time it came from a private banking contact in Switzerland. Millions of dollars had been transferred through shell companies connected to organizations that officially no longer existed. Adrian studied the transaction history until one familiar name appeared near the bottom of the page. Romano Legacy Foundation. It had been established by Adrian's late father decades earlier to fund hospitals and community programs. No one had questioned its finances because everyone believed it was beyond suspicion. Adrian slowly closed the file. "Someone has been hiding money inside my father's legacy." His voice remained steady, but I could hear the disappointment beneath it. Only 2 people ever had unrestricted access. I already knew the first name, Adrian himself. I was afraid to ask for the second. He answered anyway. "Victor." Before either of us could say another word, the front gate security system chimed. A delivery driver had left a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph taken only hours earlier. It showed Adrian and me standing together outside our townhouse that morning. Across the bottom, someone had written 5 simple words in black ink. "Stop looking or lose everything." Adrian did not react to the threat. That was what made him dangerous. Most men responded to fear. Adrian responded to information. He placed the anonymous photograph beside the letter Vincent had written years earlier and studied them as though they belonged to the same puzzle. After nearly 10 minutes of silence, he reached one conclusion. "Whoever sent this wanted us to know they could reach our home," he said quietly. "If they truly wanted to hurt us, they would not have warned us first." He picked up his phone and called Daniel. "Tell everyone the meeting in Philadelphia is still happening tomorrow morning." I looked at him in surprise. "There was never a meeting in Philadelphia," I said. Adrian nodded. "Exactly." By sunset, the false schedule had quietly spread through the organization. Every department believed Adrian would spend the next day traveling with only a small security team. It was the perfect piece of bait. Meanwhile, Adrian never intended to leave Manhattan. Instead, he transformed the Romano headquarters into the center of a silent operation. Every phone call, every vehicle, Every encrypted message leaving the building was monitored through independent channels known only to him and Daniel. Shortly after midnight, the trap began to work. Daniel hurried into the operations room, carrying a tablet. "Boss, someone forwarded your travel route less than 11 minutes after we announced it." Adrian did not even ask who. He simply extended his hand for the tablet. The message had been redirected through several encrypted accounts before reaching a private server in Montreal. On the surface, it appeared impossible to trace. Adrian smiled for the first time in days. "Too clean," he said. "Someone wanted us to find Montreal." He enlarged the financial records beneath the transmission logs. Hidden inside a routine accounting code was another destination entirely. "Charleston, South Carolina. That is where the real conversation is happening," he murmured. I watched him connect details that everyone else had overlooked. This was why rival families feared him. He never followed the obvious path. While the analysts began tracing Charleston, another report arrived. One of Victor Romano's longtime assistants had quietly purchased a private hangar outside the city 6 months earlier using a company that officially manufactured medical equipment. The company had never produced a single product. Adrian folded his arms. "How many shell companies?" "9 confirmed," Daniel answered. "Possibly more." Adrian remained silent before asking one unexpected question. "How many charities receive funding from the Romano Legacy Foundation?" Daniel blinked. 27. "Audit everyone." By early morning, the first results appeared. 26 organizations existed exactly as expected. The 27th occupied an abandoned building that had been empty for almost 8 years. The foundation had still transferred millions of dollars there every quarter. I felt a chill spread through my chest. Someone had been draining the Romano fortune in plain sight for years without triggering a single alarm. Adrian looked toward the skyline beyond the glass wall as dawn painted the city in pale gold. "This did not begin with me," he said softly. "It began while my father was still alive." His words lingered in the room until Daniel's secure phone rang again. He answered, listened for only a few seconds, then slowly lowered the device. His face had lost every trace of color. "Boss," he said carefully, "Victor just requested an emergency family dinner tonight. He says he has important news about your father's final wishes." Adrian did not answer immediately. He simply reached for the faded pocket watch Vincent had left behind and closed it with a quiet click. "Good," he said. "It is finally time to hear what my uncle wants me to believe." Victor chose the oldest Romano estate for the family dinner, a stone mansion overlooking Long Island Sound that had witnessed 3 generations of victories, betrayals, and uneasy alliances. Every portrait on its walls seemed to watch us as Adrian and I stepped inside. The dining room looked exactly as I remembered it from our first Christmas after we married. The same polished oak table, the same crystal chandelier, the same silver place settings inherited from Adrian's father. Only one thing had changed. Adrian no longer entered this house as a nephew seeking advice. He entered as a mafia boss searching for the truth. Victor greeted us with the same warm smile he had worn for years. His gray hair was perfectly combed, his tailored navy suit immaculate, his voice steady enough to calm an anxious room. "Family should never meet only during crises," he said as he embraced Adrian. "Sit down. Tonight is about your father." Adrian accepted the embrace without hesitation, yet I noticed his eyes studying Victor's reflection in the dining room window instead of the man himself. Dinner unfolded with surprising normality. Victor spoke about Adrian's childhood, his father's discipline, and the sacrifices required to build the Romano Empire. Everyone at the table relaxed little by little. Even I began wondering whether our suspicions had gone too far. Then Victor opened a leather folder and placed a sealed envelope before Adrian. "Your father asked me to give you this when I believed you were finally ready," he said quietly. Adrian examined the seal before opening it. Inside was a single handwritten page. He read every word without changing expression. When he finished, he folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket. "What did he say?" Victor asked gently. Adrian looked directly at him. "He reminded me that loyalty is proven by actions, not stories." Victor smiled. "Wise advice." Adrian nodded once. "Very wise." The conversation moved on, yet I could feel an invisible battle unfolding beneath every polite sentence. Adrian asked simple questions about foundation accounts, warehouse expansions, and old shipping agreements. Victor answered each one effortlessly, never hesitating, never appearing defensive. To everyone else it sounded like ordinary business. To Adrian, it was something else. He was measuring consistency, searching for the smallest contradiction. When dessert arrived, Daniel quietly entered the room carrying Adrian's secure phone. He leaned close enough that only Adrian could hear. Adrian listened for several seconds before placing the phone back on the table. "Excuse me," he said calmly. "I need 5 minutes." He walked toward the library without inviting anyone to follow. Victor watched him disappear down the hallway, then slowly turned toward me. His friendly smile softened. "Claire," he said almost kindly, "you have changed him." I held his gaze. People change when they finally learn whom to trust. For the briefest moment, something unreadable crossed Victor's face before the warmth returned. "Be careful," he replied. "Sometimes the people trying hardest to protect us become the ones who destroy everything." Before I could answer, Adrian returned carrying a thin folder instead of his phone. He placed it in front of Victor. Inside were copies of bank transfers connected to the abandoned charity, shell companies linked to the foundation, and photographs of the private hangar outside the city. The room fell completely silent. Victor did not panic. He simply adjusted his glasses and studied each page with remarkable composure. Finally, he looked back at Adrian and smiled almost sadly. "You are asking the wrong questions," he said. Adrian remained perfectly still, then asked me the right one. Victor folded his hands together and spoke with quiet certainty. "Before you accuse me of stealing your future, perhaps you should ask who taught Claire to find Vincent before anyone else knew he was alive." The question struck the room harder than any accusation could have. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, waiting for an answer that could either destroy my marriage or expose the truth Adrian had been chasing for days. I looked at Victor first, then at Adrian. He never spoke. He simply waited. That was one of the reasons he had survived every challenge that came with leading the Romano family. He never rushed toward conclusions, even when the answer could break his heart. I took a slow breath. "Vincent found me," I said quietly. "Not the other way around." Victor's expression remained calm, but I noticed the slightest tightening around his eyes. Adrian noticed it too. He noticed everything. 8 years ago, I continued, I volunteered at a community legal clinic in Brooklyn. An elderly man came in every Thursday under a different name. He never asked for legal advice. He only sat by the window reading newspapers. I looked toward Adrian. One afternoon, he saw a photograph of us after our engagement in a magazine. He asked if I was really going to marry Adrian Romano. Adrian listened without interrupting. When I said yes, he smiled for the first time. "He told me your father once saved his life, and that one day someone would try to destroy everything your father built without firing a single shot." Victor slowly folded his hands together. "A touching story," he said. "Did he also tell you to keep secrets from your husband?" "He told me something far more important," I answered. "He told me never to interrupt Adrian while he was making decisions unless his life depended on it." The room became perfectly still. Adrian finally spoke. "That is why you slapped me." I nodded. "Vincent warned me years ago that if the day ever came when you stopped listening to your instincts and started trusting carefully prepared evidence, someone close to you would already be controlling the board." Adrian lowered his eyes for only a moment. It was enough. He finally understood that the slap had never been an act of anger. It had been the only way to force his attention away from a carefully engineered trap. Victor leaned back in his chair and released a quiet sigh. "Interesting," he said. "Vincent always enjoyed dramatic lessons." Adrian reached into his jacket and removed the letter his father had supposedly written. He placed it beside Victor's untouched wine glass. "There is one problem," Adrian said calmly. "I never told anyone what was inside this letter." Victor smiled politely, and Adrian's voice remained steady. "5 minutes ago you referred to it as my father's final instructions. But before tonight, only Claire and I had read it. Daniel never saw it. My security team never photographed it. Nobody outside this room should have known what it contained." The warmth disappeared from Victor's face for the first time that evening. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Adrian slowly stood. No anger, no raised voice, just quiet certainty. "You did not write this letter," Adrian said, "but you already knew exactly what it said." Victor looked toward the family portrait hanging above the fireplace, then back at Adrian. A faint smile returned to his face, calmer than ever. "You finally sound like your father," he said softly. Unfortunately for both of us, you figured it out one move too late. At that exact moment, every light inside the mansion went dark, and somewhere beyond the windows the backup generators failed all at once. Darkness lasted less than 4 seconds. When the emergency generators restored the lights, nothing inside the dining room looked different at first glance. The crystal glasses were still standing. The portraits still watched from the walls. Every chair remained occupied except one. Victor Romano was gone. Adrian did not move toward the doorway. He walked instead to the large window overlooking the estate grounds and quietly studied the headlights disappearing beyond the front gate. He planned every second, he said, even his exit. Daniel rushed into the room moments later carrying a tablet filled with live security feeds. Boss, every exterior camera was interrupted for exactly 23 seconds. The backup system was disabled from inside the estate. Adrian nodded as though he had expected exactly that outcome. Seal every financial account connected to the Legacy Foundation, he ordered. Freeze every company that received transfers from the abandoned charity. Inform every allied family that Victor Romano no longer speaks for this organization. Daniel hurried away without another question. Adrian turned toward me, and for the first time since this nightmare had begun, the weight he carried seemed different. It was no longer the burden of uncertainty. It was the burden of truth. He spent years preparing me to inherit this empire, Adrian said quietly. All the while he was preparing to inherit it himself. We returned to Manhattan before sunrise. By then the first reports had already confirmed what Adrian suspected. Victor's network depended entirely on hidden financial channels built beneath the reputation of the Romano name. Without access to those accounts, the alliances he had quietly purchased began collapsing one by one. Men who had followed him for money quickly discovered that loyalty disappears when the money does. Adrian never celebrated. He simply corrected what had been broken. Over the following weeks, he personally met with every allied family, every legitimate business partner, and every community organization supported by the Romano Foundation. He honored every promise his father had made while closing every door Victor had secretly opened. Watching him work reminded me why people respected him long before they feared him. He did not rule through chaos. He ruled through discipline. 1 month later, Adrian called another gathering of every major family. This time the atmosphere felt completely different from the night everything had changed. No whispers, no hidden agendas, only quiet expectation. Adrian stepped forward and looked around the room before his eyes found mine. Most of you remember the night my wife struck me in front of this entire council, he said calmly. No one spoke. No one even shifted in their seats. Many of you believed it embarrassed your mafia boss. He paused, then continued with the same steady voice. You were wrong. It saved my life because it forced me to question what I thought I already knew. He crossed the room until he stood beside me. Before hundreds of witnesses, he gently took my hand instead of speaking another command. Power without truth becomes arrogance, he said, and loyalty without honesty becomes blindness. Claire reminded me of both. I felt every eye in the room watching as Adrian lifted my hand with quiet respect. There was no performance in the gesture, no weakness, only gratitude. In that moment, everyone finally understood why the most powerful man in the room had never punished the woman who dared to challenge him. She had not dishonored his authority. She had protected it. As the meeting ended and the families quietly departed, Adrian looked across the skyline glowing beneath the first light of morning and smiled almost to himself. My father built this empire with strength, he whispered. You taught me how to keep it with wisdom. And I realized the greatest victory we had won was never over the enemies hiding in the shadows. It was over the pride that nearly kept the truth hidden forever.